You probably remember Mel Gibson as one of the biggest names Hollywood has ever seen. The man who made Braveheart. The guy who gave us Lethal Weapon. The director who shocked the entire world with The Passion of the Christ. For decades, Mel Gibson was untouchable, a genuine Hollywood legend who could do no wrong. But on one single summer night in 2006, everything he had built over 30 years came crashing down in a matter of hours. And what makes this story so wild is that it all started with an interview. A normal, everyday celebrity press interview that millions of people watched. Nobody watching that interview could have ever guessed that just a few hours later, Mel Gibson would be standing on the side of the Pacific Coast Highway in handcuffs. So what exactly happened between that interview and that arrest? What did he say? What did he do? And why did those few hours completely change the rest of his life? Stay with us, because this story goes much deeper than most people ever realized. To really understand how far Mel Gibson fell that night, you first need to understand how high he had climbed. This was not just any celebrity. This was a man who had beaten every single odd that life threw at him from the very beginning. Mel Carlomsil Gerard Gibson was born on January 3, 1956, in Peekskill, New York. He was the sixth of 11 children, growing up in a loud, crowded house with deep Irish-American roots. His parents, Hutton and Gibson, raised their family with strong faith and strong values. In fact, even Mel's unusual middle names were inspired by Irish saints, a direct nod to his mother's hometown of Longford in Ireland. His family had a little bit of star power already running through their blood. His grandmother was a talented opera singer, and his grandfather had built a small fortune in the tobacco business. But it was not fame or fortune that changed everything for the Gibson family. It was an injury lawsuit. Back in 1968, Mel's father Hutton won a massive $145,000 settlement after a workplace injury. In today's money, that is well over $1 million. And instead of just sitting on that money, Hutton Gibson made one of the most life-changing decisions a father can make. He packed up his entire family and moved them halfway across the world to New South Wales, Australia. Mel was just 12 years old at the time. The move was not only about a fresh start and new opportunities. There was another very specific reason behind it. Hutton wanted to keep his oldest son as far away as possible from the Vietnam War draft. Australia was the answer. And as it turned out, that move to the other side of the world would accidentally set young Mel on the path to becoming one of the most famous actors who ever lived. Growing up in Australia, Mel attended St. Leo's Catholic College, where he was educated by the Christian Brothers. He was a regular kid finding his feet in a new country, but something inside him was quietly building. When he eventually enrolled at the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, it became very clear very fast that Mel Gibson was not like the other students. He tackled the lead role in Romeo and Juliet alongside future star Judy Davis. He even played the fairy queen Titania in an experimental production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, showing from the very start that he was not afraid to take risks or look foolish for the sake of his craft. When he graduated in 1977, he hit the ground running and never stopped. His very first film paid him just $400. It was called Summer City, and it was nothing special. But the very same year, he landed a role that would change everything. The film was called Mad Maximum. It paid him $9,000. That is all. $9,000. But that low-budget Australian action movie turned Mel Gibson into a global star almost overnight. Critics immediately noticed something different about him. Legendary film critic Vincent Canby openly said the young actor had that rare, impossible-to-fake star quality, comparing him to a young Steve McQueen. Others saw shades of Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart in the way he carried himself on screen. Hollywood's doors flew open, and Mel walked straight through them without looking back. What followed was one of the most impressive careers in the history of the film industry. The gritty Mad Max series, the emotional wartime drama Gallipoli, then the Lethal Weapon franchise, which turned him into the biggest action star on the planet. But even at the peak of that action hero fame, Mel refused to be put in a box. He turned down the role of James Bond, even after Sean Connery personally encouraged him to take it. He chose Shakespeare instead, starring in Hamlet. He charmed audiences in romantic comedies like What Women Want. He directed Braveheart and walked home with the Academy Award for Best Director. Then came The Passion of the Christ in 2004, a deeply personal film shot entirely in Aramaic and Latin that he funded with his own money after every major Hollywood studio refused to touch it. Despite all the controversy surrounding it, the film made over $370 million in the United States alone, making it the highest-grossing R-rated movie in American history at the time. By any measure, Mel Gibson was at the absolute top of the entertainment world. And then came July 28, 2006. A date that Mel Gibson will never forget for the rest of his life. It had been a busy season for Mel. He was deep in the promotional cycle for his new film Apocalypto, giving interviews, making appearances, and staying in the public eye. On the evening of July 27th, going into the early hours of July 28th, Mel had been drinking. Not just a little. He had been drinking heavily. Now, this was not a completely new battle for him. Mel had struggled with alcohol and drug addiction for years earlier in his life, but he had managed to stay clean for a long stretch of time before this. Then, just a couple of months before that summer night, he relapsed. He described it later as one of those moments where you can be perfectly clean for years, and then suddenly someone puts a glass right under your nose, and before you even realize what is happening, it is already too late. The habit had come back, and he had not told anyone. So there he was, well past 2 in the morning, driving his car down the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, California. He was going 87 miles per hour in a 4 to 5 mile per hour zone. That is nearly double the speed limit on one of the most famous and dangerous coastal roads in all of California. A local sheriff's deputy named James Me spotted the car flying down the road and immediately pulled him over. When the breathalyzer test came back, Mel's blood alcohol level was 0.12%, well above the legal limit of 0.08%. The deputy officially placed him under arrest for driving under the influence. And that is when things went from bad to catastrophic. As Mel Gibson was being processed and booked at the police station, something ugly came pouring out of him. Standing there in handcuffs, drunk and furious, he unleashed a shocking wave of deeply offensive anti-Semitic remarks. He said things that were so hateful and so specific that the arresting officers were stunned. The words were vile. They targeted Jewish people in the most disgusting way imaginable. And within hours, those words leaked out of that police station and exploded across every headline in the world. One of Hollywood's biggest stars had just exposed a side of himself that nobody on the outside had ever seen. The entertainment industry went into immediate shock. Jewish community leaders worldwide came out in fierce condemnation. Studio executives who had happily made hundreds of millions of dollars alongside Mel Gibson suddenly went very, very quiet. Months later, on October 10, 2006, Mel Gibson sat down with journalist Diane Sawyer on ABC News for what became one of the most watched celebrity interviews of that entire decade. It was the first time he had spoken publicly about the arrest. He looked tired and genuinely ashamed. He called his own words despicable. He tried to explain to Sawyer that what had come out of his mouth that night was nothing more than the stupid, meaningless rambling of a drunk man. He said he was working hard to fix what he had broken inside himself and to repair the pain he had caused others. He told Sawyer that the absolute last thing he ever wanted to be in this world was the kind of man those words made him sound like. When Sawyer pushed him on the wave of powerful Hollywood figures who had publicly called on studios to stop working with him, Mel admitted it made him feel sad. Not because he thought they were wrong to react that way, but because he knew his own words had frightened and hurt people enough to trigger that kind of response. He said it was their choice to make, and he had no power to force anyone to change their mind about him. On the legal side, he chose not to fight the charges in court. He pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor charge of driving with an elevated blood alcohol level. The judge sentenced him to 3 years of probation and ordered him to complete a full alcohol rehabilitation program. 6 to 5 days after his arrest, he told Diane Sawyer that he had not touched a single drop of alcohol since that night on the Pacific Coast Highway. He called liquor a poison, but he was completely honest about how hard it was to stay away from it. He told her that even the very real fear of losing your family, your career, and your entire life is sometimes not enough to stop an addict from picking up a bottle. He said that if your nature is to drink, you are completely defenseless against it on your own. You have to keep that dark part of yourself under constant watch. And you absolutely cannot do it without reaching out to your friends, the people who love you, and ultimately to God. What saved him during those first dark months after the arrest was his support system. He said he was completely overwhelmed by how many people came forward to pull him back from the edge. Friends, family members, and people he had not spoken to in years all reached out. It was that human connection, more than anything else, that kept him going. But even as Mel tried to move forward, the arrest ripped open other old wounds. In 2010, actress Winona Ryder gave an interview to GQ magazine where she shared a disturbing story from roughly 15 years earlier. She claimed that at a Hollywood party back around 1996, she and her friend had been on the receiving end of Gibson's hateful language. According to Ryder, a heavily intoxicated Gibson had approached her openly gay friend and made a deeply offensive homophobic remark. Then when it came out that Ryder herself was Jewish, she claimed Gibson directed a vile anti-Semitic slur at her as well. She said she had never heard the specific phrase before, and was immediately shocked and unsettled by the whole exchange. She said she knew right then and there what kind of views he was carrying around inside him. But when she tried to tell people about it back in the 90s, nobody in Hollywood believed her. Gibson's team flatly denied the entire story, calling Ryder a liar. Ryder stood firm. She said she genuinely believed in redemption and forgiveness, and she truly hoped Gibson had found a way to deal with his personal demons. But she was not going to pretend it did not happen. She called it a painful and vivid memory she would never forget. Meanwhile, the personal wreckage of Mel's life kept piling up. In 2009, after 29 years of marriage, his wife Robin Moore filed for divorce. Almost immediately after that separation, Mel began dating Russian songwriter and pianist Oksana Grigorieva. By the end of 2009, they had a baby daughter together named Lucia. But the relationship was already cracking behind closed doors. By 2010, it had completely collapsed. Oksana filed for a restraining order against Mel and accused him of domestic violence. Then, private audio recordings of their fights leaked online. The tapes were ugly. The public heard Mel shouting and using deeply abusive language. His talent agency, William Morris Endeavor, one of the most powerful in Hollywood, dropped him immediately. He was even removed from the cast of The Hangover Part 2 after the film's crew protested his involvement. The man who had once commanded a $25 million salary per film was suddenly struggling to get cast at all. Mel later admitted in an interview that he had slapped Oksana once during a heated argument while she was holding their baby daughter. He claimed he feared for the baby's safety in that moment. He denied punching her or causing the injuries she described. Their legal battles over custody and finances dragged on for years. Oksana was eventually awarded a settlement, but lost $500,000 of it after breaking her confidentiality agreement by giving a public interview about their relationship. Through all of it, Mel never completely disappeared. He slowly, quietly began to rebuild. His 2016 war film Hacksaw Ridge earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Director and reminded the film world what he was truly capable of when he was focused and sober. He expanded his production company, Icon Productions, into a major global force. He served as executive producer on the 2023 breakout hit Sound of Freedom. The man who had fallen from grace as spectacularly as anyone in Hollywood history was finding his footing again, one step at a time. But life was not done throwing hard things at him. By the end of 2025, Mel confirmed that his longtime girlfriend Rosalind Russ had walked out on the relationship after more than a decade together. Sources close to him described him as genuinely heartbroken. And then came news of the sudden and tragic death of his former co-star Nadia Fez, who passed away at just 57 years old after being found unconscious at the bottom of a swimming pool at a luxury gym in Paris. Insiders claimed that Mel had developed incredibly strong feelings for her during the filming of their 2022 thriller On the Line, and that her sudden death hit him like a freight train. He had spoken of her warmth, her elegance, and her genuine kindness both on set and off. Losing her, on top of everything else, was said to have left him completely devastated. Yet even now, even after everything, Mel Gibson has not given up. He talks openly about wanting to keep living life completely on his own terms, just as his father Hutton did well past the age of 100. The arrest that night on the Pacific Coast Highway did not kill his career permanently. It did not silence him. It exposed him. It humbled him. And in a strange, painful way, it may have saved his life by forcing him to finally face the darkness that he had been carrying around inside him for a very long time. The interview that night was supposed to be just another stop on a press tour. Instead, it became the last normal moment before everything changed. And the question that Hollywood still quietly asks is this: how much of what came out of Mel Gibson that night in those handcuffs was the alcohol talking, and how much of it was just the truth finally breaking through? What do you think about Mel Gibson's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories about the wild, hidden side of Hollywood's biggest legends, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because we have got so much more coming your way.